Just realized.
Okay, so that should ask you if that's okay.
Yep, that's okay.
So good. I think we're going to be there any second, Grisha. So we'll.
Okay. And I usually record them as well. If I were you, just, I don't know if you do that, but it doesn't say you are. Just because
Yeah,
sometimes it doesn't stream in and then
Cool.
you lose it.
Yeah, I can do that. There you go.
There you go.
Record as
Yay.
well. Oh yeah, we're live on Facebook. Brilliant. Oh my god. So hi, Grisha.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. Hi everybody. Oh my god, we got a treat tonight. We've got world renowned, and we can really say that Grisha Stewart joining us tonight, and we're going to have a good chat about Grisha's amazing vision that you brought to the industry, and especially to how we work with dogs, which is really kind of crystallized with the B.A.T process. We're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a bit. But welcome, Grisha, and how are you today?
I'm good. And I realized that I have a new puppy. Well, I'm an adolescent dog who's not a puppy. He's 9 months old, and he's wanting to get outside. And so I decided to give a round of chew toys, which might be noisy. And so I'm going to apologize in advance for that.
I say, well, I've got everyone knows about Molly. Molly's not even in the room at the moment, which is a little bit scary. Who's my puppy, but I think she was snoozing quite nicely in front of the fire. So hopefully she'll be.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah. So we'll see, but she'll come in and let me know if she needs anything. Great. Well, Grisha, let's start off then. I really want to start, as I often do with these chats, about thinking about your own journey into dogs, really, and what you did pre-dogs, and how you ended up finding your way into working with these wonderful animals.
Well, I would say probably the journey started, very young, of course. We had dogs. We were a family that always had dogs. And in fact, at one point we had 3 intact females, mixed breeds, that all had puppies. And so we had 20 some dogs at the house at one point. And which was a lot. And right. And it was interesting because my mother was basically anti-training. So she's training to her was more traditional training, and she didn't want our dogs to go through that. So we had no training whatsoever. Although looking now, we did have training, right? We could call the dogs. They worked in our household in the ways that we wanted to, but she just didn't have the label for it as training. It was just living with dogs. And then let's see, and then fast forward a little bit. So I went to a babysit for a person, and their mom was an agility instructor that founded NADAC, which is an agility organization. Ended up babysitting for her, and then watching their dogs and kind of playing with their dogs, and getting a little bit of a bug there as to what was possible with reinforcement. And then in kind of no dog during college, I went to school to be a mathematician, and I had a double major with math and German, and then ended up with a master's in math, and was headed toward teaching that. And then I got a dog. My first dog is an adult, and Spoon was her name, and she's lovely, or was lovely. And I just kind of got the passion for that. I started taking classes, and the person there was using quite sort of what we would call a balanced approach now. So some treats, some punishment. And I was like, I'm not going to do the punishment route. And she said, okay, but this is really like power steering. You want to use this. And Spoon was a huge puller. And so for a week, I actually did use a prong collar, and was like, oh, this is amazing. And I had my nieces walk the dog, and then like realized I was totally shutting down this beautiful, amazing dog, and that it was not consistent with the way that I wanted to live my life. And so anyway, I then went off of that and started experimenting with clicker training, with using is this too noisy? I can
No, not at all. No.
Okay. Experimenting
when that noise stops, we've got to worry.
It's right.
That's it.
So experimenting with clicker training with a bottle cap, because the trainer had said, oh, clicker training is stupid, you don't want to do it. And so I was like, well, I won't go buy a clicker, but I'll try this little thing. And so it totally worked. And at that point in I would say how old was I? Early 20s. Control was lovely, right? Being able to tell a dog to do something, and they do. what I needed at the time, and doing it with positive reinforcement felt entirely humane. And then as I aged, I realized that I wasn't the only being in the picture, and that they need to have controllability just as much as we do, and they have needs. And so that expanded more and more throughout my career. B.A.T certainly, the technique I developed helps sort of cement that, and then has had it grow from there.
There's quite a bit there that I just want to kind of
Sorry.
No, it's great. No, it's great, but I'm just a little bit overwhelmed by the constant talk of math, because me and math don't get on very well. The thought of actually becoming like going all through it, but that's really interesting, because I guess that means you must have quite an analytical brain then, about looking at things in that kind of way that you would need to look at things with math. And if you
I sort of I'm like a systems approach kind of person. So I didn't do wonderfully at math that had a lot of numbers in it, ironically. So statistics, for example, not my thing, but theoretical math where there's a theorem and then you prove it based on all these things that you think are unrelated, that have some small little causal factor, and you can bring them in to prove what you're trying to prove. I love that. Like finding an elegant proof of a theorem I love it. So
I think as soon as they started bringing letters into maths, we call it maths over here. As soon as they started putting letters into maths, I was like, right, that's enough for me.
That's the best part.
Numbers, so actually, then
I'm also a huge reader, and so those two things, I love sort of concepts of things that stand for other things, and metaphors. And so putting the letters into math, it's basically it's like using a metaphor, right? So so if you'd like the tie in there, if you like metaphors, you actually at this point in your life may like math. You just were introduced to it in such a way that it might have created an emotional response. That
can we just touch on that? Actually, I know we're going off on a tangent, but
of course, I love tangent.
Really good point, because when we think back to our structured educational experience at school, we were very much at the mercy, really, of those who were the educator. And when we ended up falling into a kind of rut regarding learning, and it wasn't inspiring, and it was a chore, and it was kind of forced upon us. I look back, I've got a new interest in recent times, really, of physics, which I didn't grasp at all, but it's only because I got to see Dr. Brian Cox.
Sorry, we've got a little scenario going on. I can't know if you can see the tableau, but Suzuki has the rest of her Chewy, and Joey's wondering if he could have it. So the answer is no, and she just gave him a little growl and went back to her Chewy. And honestly, this is great. Like her saying, "Hey, dude, back off." I'm actually going to help her a little bit by distracting him. But anyway, most people get upset at her, but he's the one, right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead with your physics.
Arthur, our older dog, he used to be the one that used to pinch poor old Harley, who's our middle dog, age-wise. He's our black lab. Arthur always pinches everything because Arthur's got major FOMO. He's like, I've got to have it, right? And now Molly, who's the puppy, she is the queen of FOMO, right? Big time. So, and she's worked out all these ingenious ways to really peeve Arthur off so she can get even at a young age, she's only 6 months. So if he's on the rug, she'll start tugging at the rug, and then he'll get up and he'll leave the thing behind. And it's funny how they work this stuff out. How am I going to get that? So it's interesting. Yeah. So go back to that. So I was in. So this also kind of hits back to what you're saying about your early experiences at home. Again, the difference between that structured learning and that experimental environmental learning, which the dogs did in your home then, because they were learning all the time, right? But they were learning things in a connected way. They weren't necessarily having set times to do it. And that's the thing with learning for us. So now I've got the bug on this stuff, and somebody like Dr. Brian Cox, I'm sure you've heard of him over there as well. He's got a great way of connecting in with the environment and making things very easily accessible and starting to create that wonder. And I guess that's what you're talking about with math. Maybe if I looked at it again now, I might think, oh God, there's some wonder there. And I guess math does underpin everything, right? I guess, there's always something. And this is interesting for me, because when we think about what you've created with that, and also your kind of philosophy and vision that you brought to the community, this is why our early experiences are so important, because they're the building blocks that all come together. That ability to step back, to look, to theorize, and also the innate empathy and compassion you have. This is one area that I'm really inspired with your work, looking at the human side of things. I did your How to Be Human course, highly recommend it, everybody. Don't forget about Grisha's school as well. We're going to make sure we put all the links in. I think we've got good old Claire. Thank God for Claire, because I'd have been talking to you on Thursday and you'd have been turning up today if it wasn't for Claire. To be fair, they both start with the letter T. So I was
right, practically the same.
So
Right?
Claire will put in some
Mathematically, they're about the same.
So
one from the end of the week, you know.
Yeah. I know it's crazy. I don't know. I don't know what goes on in my brain sometimes. But yeah, so all these kind of things come together, and having that empathy, you know, moving beyond. This is a big thing that we need to think about more widely, because I think we are in a bit of a bubble sometimes in our community about, you know, we kind of attract like-minded people. And the good thing about my dog center care group is a big portion of our group are caregivers. They are owners who are looking to do things where perhaps a little bit differently, or to look beyond some of the other ways of looking at stuff. And I think that awareness of moving beyond doing something just because it works. So the prong collar kind of worked, but it's that awareness, but actually that's not great for the dog's emotional experience. And so all these component parts that you've talked about are really important for those building blocks when we think about the impact that B.A.T had, I think, on the community by bringing in so many different areas. I think a lot of the component parts were already around. It's having the vision to bring those bits together. So let's just talk a little bit about B.A.T. You know, you can describe better than me. So for those who aren't fully aware of B.A.T, tell us a little bit about how B.A.T came to be, how you pulled these things. You thought, oh, this is a thing. I'm building something up here as a kind of a visionary response to how I'm going to work. And then what that actually looks like, what B.A.T actually is.
Sure. So, and can I, before I lose the train of thought that's been sort of running around in my head, can I share that first, and then we'll get back to that?
Yeah, 100%. I've gone off on 100 tangents already. So
okay, cool.
Yeah.
I just want to wrap up some of the tangents we were just on, because it's, so the way that our schooling system was created is very similar to how dog training systems were created. So school is created largely so that we would have good factory workers, and the dog training was largely so that we would have good military dogs, right? So a lot of the dog trainers originally came out of the military post World War II. And so that's that idea of like, you will have to do this, otherwise we will die, right? And for the students, you have to do this or otherwise we'll lose money, right? There's an urgency that then doesn't take into account the needs of the individual. And of course, there are other ways to train things or teach things that would probably even serve those needs even better. If we could have probably even better factory workers or war dogs by allowing them choice and self-care and that sort of thing. But these older systems are basically cultural habits that if you think of sort of the culture as one being, right? One like dog, right? It's got this habit that's worked for a while. And it takes time to change, and habits only can be replaced if there's a substitute. And so finding ways to deal with our inner child or deal with each other or our dogs that do meet the needs of the individual being, I think is really what's going to move humanity more forward. And so then circling back to things like your experience with mathematics, that was taught in such a way that so to parallel it, right? Imagine the new caregiver, right? Who's like or the new trainer who's just learned enough to be like, I know how to train. And so they're teaching a dog, but they kind of barely know how to teach it in the first place. That's also what you get in math teachers. And so there's this frustration and falling back on old tools or shaming or punishing that a lot of like dogs get or children get in those areas that are a little bit more challenging. And so as the learner, it's not your fault. There's so much that people blame themselves for not learning. And then now as we're adults, we're like, wait a minute, like we just weren't taught in a way that our brains could receive, right? We're working through trauma. They're not teaching excellently all the time. It's a whole big mess. And so we can learn whatever we want if we can find the right ways to have it get to our brain. So curiosity is the key.
And that's really important, because what you described there is one of the biggest flaws of our, well, there's many, I think we can agree on that, on our structured educational system, the kind of linear fashion of that learning.
Dogs, come. Sorry,
Whereas
go
all,
ahead.
that's okay, yeah, but whereas all good learning, of course, is far from linear, and it's about that kind of sharing through vision and passion that people can relate and connect, and what they're learning then starts to have internal value. I think a lot of our educational system, we're pitting peers against peers, so kids against kids, to attain certain grades,
Yep.
rather than them adding value to what they're doing. When I did maths, we have O levels. I did my O levels. Even when I did my degree, my psychology degree, you still had to do a maths and stats element that you had to pass. So you could fail other bits about psychology, just crazily enough, in that first year, but you had to pass the maths and stats. So everybody's like, oh, God, maths and stats. So I kind of muddled through it, but it had no internal value for me. And I think that's harder then to connect to. And what I love about B.A.T, we're going to come on to B.A.T in a bit more detail in a minute, is how much we're supporting dogs to find and support those innate behaviors that will have internal value for them. Because I think a lot of traditional reinforcement training has slipped at times into an arbitrary view of I can get you to do this instead because I think it's more appropriate, but that might not actually have an internal value or offer relief to the dog.
Absolutely. And that's a great feed into B.A.T. So B.A.T is, for those who don't know, it's a technique that I developed to help dogs gain confidence and social skills through a really organic process of using enough space and time for the natural process of socialization to take place. So instead of kind of bringing the dog too close and either correcting or needing to redirect with treats, we work as much as we can at a distance where the dog can be curious about the trigger, the other dog, the people, and sort of just kind of surf that like edge of discomfort where they're like, okay, I see that's there. I'm interested. I'm going to get the information I need and then move away. And so we have specific techniques with using long lines and harnesses and ways to make it as comfortable for the dog as possible and as safe for everyone as possible. But that's the gist of it. And then of course we're blending it with other techniques to be able to manage. So for example, I did B.A.T with Joey today with the person at our house outside. And we did, some hand targeting when I realized, we're a little too close, and then moved us away. And then we went back to regular B.A.T where I'm following the dog around and sort of essentially preventing just straight lines approaches. So that's B.A.T in a very small.
And it's interesting you mentioned there about being that kind of edge of discomfort. I think it's very important that we recognize that the role of stress, the role of kind of that nervous system just starting to get spiked a little bit is part of everyday life for everybody, going through that normal threat evaluation. Jean and Laura Donaldson talks a lot about cognitive reappraisal and how a lot of dogs who struggle is because that quick thinking brain is kicked in because it's just nervous system response. And it's allowing an element, I just use the terms elevation and decompression. It's recognizing that some of that elevation will start to happen, but supporting a more self-regulatory framework for the dog. And I think I've observed some setup sessions that are so below threshold, if you want to use that term, and actually nothing's happening for that dog to actually process about what's going on, the trigger, how they feel, how they're going to cope, what they're going to do to maneuver.
They might as well have stayed home.
Yeah. And of course, we also see some setups where it's the other way around, where the dog is just really pushed into a situation where they're not doing anything, and we can manipulate behaviors at that point, but that dog probably isn't remembering anything they've done at that point because they're just going through a set of patterns just to find some exit.
Right. And I would have to say that over time, as I get my dog body language skills get more honed, that the setups where I thought nothing was happening are actually more and more like lots is happening. So as long as there's awareness of the other being and the picture, that's things are happening. So we tend as trainers to want to sort of like be able to measure, how close did I get this time, or which is useful in some sense, but that tends to make us a little more goal driven. But yeah, there are certainly some times where it's like there's squirrels in the trees and the dog's like, yeah, that's really all I'm focused on. The trigger is far too far away from me.
I love how you said in one of the interviews, or it might be one of your videos actually, where you say that if B.A.T's done well, it should look really boring.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I love the phrase that someone called it boring aggression treatment. So it should, the dog should not be bored, but it's boring. Yeah. So, and as I find it really exciting as a handler to be like, oh, can you do this? How about this? And, you know, and watching as the dog decides to take chances, that I'm there to support that. I'm not leading it and saying, can you do this, by like asking them to go into places, which is what I did in my early training. But it's more the dog leading. So my job is to get the dog into a scenario in which they're able to start having a conversation with the trigger, the other dog, the person, the whatever. And I actually, every time I say trigger now, I'm thinking of Kathy Sadeo's recent talk where she said that maybe we shouldn't use the word trigger, because we actually, it's more of just a cue, rather than something that elicits an automatic response. There's actually learning involved. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think just thinking about what you were saying there about the dog having more of a measured response, and also showing more interest sometimes as they're going through that process. I think there is many of the dogs I work with that struggle with various degrees of social engagement with another dog. A lot of them actually, they really want to socially process. They really want to, and they have their own kind of socially processing criteria, really, once you kind of see that play out. But they have a history of social engagement being thrust on them a lot. So that's why that nervous system engages a lot. And you don't really see much other than a dog is barking and lunging at that point. And I think finding out from a lot of these dogs that actually they don't have a problem with dogs, for example, per se, it's the way that they need to be able to process and the ability to be able to process in a way that is innately useful for them and quite self-regulatory. It's something that I've noticed a lot with dogs when I've used the kind of B.A.T techniques.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to make sure for folks listening that it's not that we're always working at a distance, but they need that at first. So it or some sort of way to reduce the arousal so that they can start to put a pause between stimulus and response. And it's something that we don't often do as humans, except for a lot of like folks who meditate. That really it starts to become second nature to have sort of a first response and then ponder, is this how I actually want to be? And it's not that we're necessarily, knowing that that's what the dogs are doing, but we do see more of them being aware of something and not just immediately going into a reaction, but actually taking in information and then doing something. So. Yeah.
And space, you talk about time and space, that's really important. And sometimes that is physical space, like you say, and quite often we start off like that because that allows more time for that dog to do the processing. But also it's about the dog's headspace as well, about kind of what space they're in. And even just kind of, I ask my clients to look at their dog over a 7-day cycle and look at them in many different ways, because by the time they turn up at a which has to be an arbitrary time. We're meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We've got to see what dog turns up at 10 o'clock and what capacity they have mentally to do what we need to do.
Right. I have a saying I tell clients, which is train the dog you have today. Like every day, every hour is a little bit different. And I love your point about it not just being space, because, for example, I live in the country, and so we did a setup recently that was in the country, and he needed so much distance. And what he because there was an expectation that there wouldn't be any dogs or people in this space, and so people particularly he was reactive to, and so we were needing to be really, really far away. And then we did another setup that was more kind of in a semi-urban environment where there was an open space for him to explore, lots to do. And then there was a cluster of a lot of people going in and out of a shop so that he could habituate somewhat to the environment. And so there was less of this sudden environmental contrast for him of suddenly there's a person in my space where I expected none. And so, yeah, as we manipulate the environment, it might be more distance, but the space may just be making it more interesting, changing the relative heights, changing how much is there, etc.
And that's an important part about it, isn't it? Because it's looking at, especially in the early stages, looking at having an enriching environment anyway, because we know that when that dog's in that processing mode, we see a lot with, when Sarah Fisher talks with her free work, all these things, when that dog's in that processing mode, all those that sensory integration, all those sensory input channels are working more freely, so they're more able to be able to process even things that they might find difficult or challenging in the environment.
Absolutely. And every dog is unique. There's of course a breed level, but there's an individual level. So as a lab, he's got certain traits that are going to be something I can capitalize on, or needs that I need to meet, but he's also an individual. So Molly Sumridge is a C.B.A.T, and she's giving a talk next week on primitive breeds. And I'm super excited to see like how she makes changes that are specific to those, because every dog, like I said, is an individual, but there's some certain things that we can sort of say, okay, these guys are sight hounds and they're probably going to need XYZ a little bit more. So I tend to do more sniffing enrichment, but there's also visual components and things like that.
And that's talk that's happening in your school, is it?
In my school, yeah. It's
Yeah,
Molly Sumridge, and it's a primitive breeds, the wolf in your kitchen, I think is it's called.
Oh, what a great title.
Yeah.
That's a great title. Cool. Maybe
Yeah.
Claire could pop that up as well. I've got my thread's a little bit behind.
She's good like that. Yeah.
Yeah, she's good like that. Great. Good old Claire. So a couple of things there just to unpack there. I think this is really useful, I think, for professionals and caregivers actually who are listening in. Training the dog in front of you that you have in front of you, I think that's really important, especially for us professionals sometimes, because I talk a lot about trying to be aware of the friction between task orientated and care orientated, and just trying to get the balance right. And we can fall into a task orientated. Okay, I'm meeting you today 10 o'clock, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going to walk, and this is what's going to happen. But the dog might not be in on that memo, and the dog might not be up to it, or the dog might be up for more than that, actually. And I think it's just really starting off without those expectations. You kind of have those little goals in the back head about what I'd like to do. I know with me on coaching walks even, there's certain points where I think if I go left, I'll go to the beach. If I go right, I'll go to the back end of the park where it's quieter. And I have to keep checking in with the dog to see what they're up for and a lot of that comes from how well they're processing, of course. You mentioned earlier about really learning about dog body language. And I think it is a lifelong mission, right? Because we're trying to learn the communicative truth of another species here, and it takes forever for us to learn that, probably, because we're all constantly learning about those things. And the second thing you said about recognizing the individuality of dogs, and that comes back to that learning about body language, because there's a lot of stuff that's quite generic. There's going to be so many things that are unique to our dogs about what they need, how they process, how they learn. And we do tend to lump dogs into dogs, don't we? This is how you train a dog, period. Without thinking about some of the subtleties. And we do the same with the structured education with kids, of course. That's another problem with that, of course. We just think, put the kids in, especially a comprehensive system that we have here in the UK. It just presumes that everybody's going to learn the same way and kind of behave the same way and connect in the same way, when it's not the case.
Right. Totally. And our carers are also unique, right? So what they can handle works for them is going to be varied as well. And because I always like to sort of look at both sides, there's a lot that we do have in common, right? Our nervous systems react very similarly to breath work, right? So for example, if we do breathing exercises, we tend to sort of all relax. And dogs tend, as a species, because they're bonded to us, to respond to how we are, right? So if I'm tense, my dog has a more likelihood of being tense, right? There's a co-regulation that's going on. And so that's the glimmers, are something that I've started putting into the B.A.T work, is specifically teaching positive triggers instead of just the negative ones.
Right, I'm going to come on to glimmers in a mo, because I really want to talk about glimmers, and also this notion of co-regulation, because I think these things are really important for us. And this is why I like looking at connecting through the emotional experience, because we all have an emotional experience and they're all unique to us as individuals. And especially when we're working with caregivers, it's such a good point, Grisha, because we've got to make sure that we're not asking too much of that caregiver, and you know, learning more about, when I start my therapy process, support process, the first thing I want to know is about the caregiver and their emotional investment and their emotional experience about what's going on, because we learn a lot that way. And people want to share that. Actually, they don't just want to talk about the dog's challenges, they want to talk about their own, and also their connection through the dog, and why they have the dog, and all their needs that they have. And learning about that is really important, isn't it, for getting those best outcomes?
Yeah, and I have a personal story to share from yesterday, in a vulnerability here. So so my husband's dad died this morning, so he's been on his way to passing recently for a while, but especially in the last week. And so, you know, it's a little our cups are a little less full, and we have this new lab, and he has this bark that is so piercing when he's you know, hearing someone outside. And there was a moment yesterday where I was just like, that's it, like the cup's empty, and I would just like, shut up. And then of course he did, and then of course I felt terrible. And so even though, like, most of the time, right, I have the ability to look at a situation and look at, what does the dog need, what do I need, yada yada, there are times when I just can't, very rarely, but they happen, right? And so then we can always just circle back, as I did, and say, okay, that's not how I want to train, what do I do now? So first of all, I just give myself a timeout, just went upstairs, I'm gonna chill for a minute, and then come up with, okay, if this is a client, what would I tell them to do? All right, let's cue the dog to go to his bed, reinforce on the bed, like various different skills. And then also increase my, in the future, increase my BAT setup so that this eventually doesn't become a problem. So.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important, really important and powerful, for people to hear us professionals share moments like that as well, because you know, if we're talking about nervous system responses, if we're talking about dysregulating, if we're talking about all these kind of things that can happen, we have to recognize that we do it as well. That's the point. We can all say and do things in the moment when kind of I use the stress bucket analogy, you know, when our bucket's too full, or we're kind of in that situation. And some listeners might have heard me share this story before, but I worked with a gentleman a little while ago who he used to hit the dog with the end of the lead. So the dog would bark, and he'd like tell him off and hit him with the lead. He wasn't thrashing him, but he used to hit him with the end of the lead. So we started talking, started our work together. I introduced the concept of the emotional experience, and we worked through it, and I listened to his side of things, and then the dog's side of things, and we kind of find that middle ground. And without me having to point stuff out, this is the good thing, I think, when you start talking in these terms with people, it is about awareness, Grisha. It's very few people are deliberately cruel, they're just unaware. He was able to say to me, do you know what, the reason I hit my dog is not because I'm punishing him. You know, we talk about punishment and reinforcement as geeky trainers, as though it's a kind of people just do stuff, they don't know what they're doing. And he said, I wasn't punishing my dog, I did it because I was angry and embarrassed. And it's wow, really powerful what a share moment. And he's so he came to that conclusion. So he recognized, I've got to think about how I do stuff, but this is my part of the thing that I need to work on. So I was able to help him work on that stuff, look at those ways for him to be able to self-regulate himself, because all these kind of things come together. So if he hadn't shared that with me, I could have very easily just been very judgmental of him and what he was doing, and made him feel very uncomfortable and under attack, and even more embarrassed and even more angry, and all these kind of things that go on. And he's more likely now, and this is the thing about having a care orientation underneath everything else we do, is that I think a lot of owners, caregivers, are more likely to see that through. If we just leave them with a set of tasks, they might do it while we're there. They might tell us that they've done it when maybe they haven't. We've all been there. I had to go and see a physio recently, and I was the worst one ever, Grisha, because I was like, and I was saying to my husband,
we're equal on that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm terrible.
So I did it all, yeah, because I hadn't done any of it. But I think with him now, it's very unlikely he's going to repeat those patterns now, because he gets it now and he's more aware. So I think that's important.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about glimmers then. So we all talk about triggers a lot, and I think this is interesting when we think about the negative biases that we all have, that we all know about triggers, but very few people have heard about glimmers. I think if anybody's in kind of human therapy, or especially understands or has heard of some of the polyvagal theory,
Right.
they'll know a little bit more. But yeah, tell everybody about glimmers and why they're important.
So, actually this ties in super nicely with my story, because in that moment, right, we were sort of co-regulating the wrong way, right? So he was stressed, and then therefore I was more stressed, and it triggered my shame or whatever else might have come into my system. And so glimmers, the way that I work with them is to deliberately teach cues that calm the nervous system. So we can certainly find, ones that exist already for us. But I really like using breathing exercises and training that with a cue. So for example, I teach you're safe. And we start off with teaching the human. And so if you wouldn't mind doing it with me, I will do a little breathing exercise. So this is from Andrew Weil's breathing exercise at 478. And you can do whatever breathing exercises you want with this. This one I like because it's very simple, and it automatically calms the nervous system. So you start off with yourself, no dog present, and just say you're safe. And then usually I do a tactile cue as well. And then exhale all of the air, and then we're going to go in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8, and I'll coach you, and we'll do that twice. Okay, so say you're safe. You're safe. Hand on chest or hand on heart. Exhale all of your air. In for 4 through the nose. Hold. Exhale for 8. We'll do that again, and you can repeat the cue or not, but you're safe. In for 4. Hold for 7. Out for 8. And then breathe as normal. So that releases the body's sort of natural opioids. It puts us into rest and digest mode with our parasympathetic nervous system. And because we can calm down, the dog does. So first we just teach ourselves that. Like usually it takes a couple of weeks. By the way, how does that feel so far?
It's really quite amazing, because my brain goes 100 miles an hour normally, especially when I'm talking to somebody like yourself. And now I've completely forgotten everything I was thinking about a minute ago. So it's good. And it brings to, the answer is always to slow down, isn't it? And just get in the moment and to be available. I think this is important, that word available, to be available to the truth of another, let alone our own. We have to be in a more regulated state, because any elevation makes us less available, right?
Right. And so this, if it has even no other effect on the dog, what this does for us is that we're now present. We're able to observe what's happening with the dog a little bit more. We're less likely to whack them with the leash or whatever else the response might be. So we've inserted that pause. And so what I have people do is practice this for a couple of weeks by themselves without the dog, and then start to add the cue to the dog. So to say you're safe, you can still do hand on your heart. You can put your hand on the dog's chest, whatever kind of tactile feels best or most clear. And then do the breathing exercise. So, and then you would start that in areas where the dog is calm, relaxed, again, building into places that are more stressful. And I didn't give kind of the whole flow. It's in the leash walking classes really where I walked in or talked into it. It's called Stop Pulling on my site. And but basically start to, just as we would with dog cues, generalize them. So the human in those 2 weeks is generalizing the cue of you're safe to other places. So to work, or when there's a phone call and you recognize your mom before you answer it, you do the breathing exercise if she makes you nervous or whatever the thing might be. And so building that in so that you're seeing, okay, there's an environmental trigger. It's reminding me to do this breathing, and then later then adding it in with the dog.
Brilliant. And I think this is the kind of real power of glimmers, because when people say, do you know, I'm just going to go to my safe space and I'm just going to go to my kind of
Happy place.
happy place, yeah, that's a glimmer, right? And I think there's I can't remember her name now. It'll come to me in a minute. So anyway, but somebody's done a kind of like a template on triggers and glimmers that you can do for yourself. I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, so this is a lot to do with the polyvagal theory again. I think polyvagal theory is it seems to be a really big thing with everybody. A couple of years ago, it's gone very quiet again now. But I think there's a lot there for people to understand more. I know some of it's theoretical, a lot of stuff is, right, about how these things work, but especially how it splits the parasympathetic into two: one that is likely to create a freeze, one is like to make you feel that safety, and it makes sense,
and that there's a
right?
social regulation that puts it into one or the other, right? That social nervous system. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think that especially that those social connections is really important. I think this is something else that we have to recognize, I think, a little bit with some of the fallout from a very heavy, purely operant approach that we've had traditionally, which again is invariably quite task orientated, about just getting that dog to do something, having those expectations, and even from a young age having that puppy come in and have all those expectations regarding what we've got to train to get the obedient dog, rather than allowing the young pup the safety to do the experimental learning and make connections through safety with the caregiver.
Right.
Because
right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go
no,
ahead.
No, go on. No, go. Yeah, go.
So just because we tend to sort of think of a dog needs to do XYZ to sort of be a good dog, versus I have needs and that I need to set boundaries with the dogs, and they have needs as well. And so the more people are aware of what do they actually need the dog to do and not do, and then can we navigate how those needs can both be met, right? So it's like, I don't need a dog who has a perfect drop on recall, right? What I need is that if I'm scared that the dog is running away, that they come back to me. So however that looks, it doesn't need to look in sort of an obedience way. So anyway. And like our puppies, right? We don't need to teach them all of these skills unless we're actually using them to make our lives better and their lives better, right? The rest of it is, if you're doing it for fun, that's great, as long as you've really laid the foundation of freedom and safety and time not training as well. I think addiction is something that we tend to sort of create as dog trainers if we're not careful. And there's a downside to addiction, which as people would know in human society, but that somehow it's okay with dogs, and it's not for me.
We're talking off air about the kind of, when we talk with absolutes, absolutism, and that can come into training and be quite detrimental. Even that kind of that aspiration of absolute, that 100% recall, that 100% this, that 100%, and recognizing that all training has the potential to fail. When I first started my human psychology career, I did some work with the military and with amazing men and women who are highly trained, but that training can fail. My husband's an end-of-life nurse, and he's in a very high-pressure job, and sometimes the training fails. Sometimes you freeze, you become unavailable, all these kind of things that can happen, because if that emotional response gets too great, the training's like to fail. And that's the same for our dogs. We just have to recognize that, I think. And I think
even my computer's not perfect.
Have you got an Apple? Or are you an Apple person or a PC person?
Apple.
I didn't think anything went wrong with apples. Maybe I'm wrong. I know with my laptop.
Certainly less. And what I love about an Apple is versus a PC, and I'm going to tie this in, but is that so with a PC, it tends to be like the whole system crashes down, versus an Apple, it's like, okay, this one application. So it's almost like there's a little bit more mindfulness in an Apple. Like there's sort of like the whole system isn't. Yeah.
That's fair enough. I think, and that's a good analogy on this thing, isn't it? About allowing, this is the thing about being connected through and recognizing emotions as being our friends, even the painful ones, really. It's kind of taking acceptance of that, because otherwise the whole system, like the good old PC, right, will crash. Whereas if we're more
Mhm.
aware of the component bits, we can still function, but we've just got that bit that we need to think about. And I think, and
Right.
actually animals are really good at that more generally. They're good at kind of those aspects of differentiating between, you know, when you hear Kim Rothie talking a lot from an ethology point of view, and how rare it is in adult animals in the wild to dysregulate. Dysregulation happens a lot with juveniles of any species, I know. And I think we have to think about that, about why we are so good at dysregulating a lot, humans, even as adults, and how we struggle.
Mhm.
And I think this
And I
comes
think
back.
part of it is that we don't embrace the and as much as we could. That so dogs, you know, don't. I think their expectations aren't sort of driven by a theory or a theoretical piece. It's like, okay, well, this is working or it's not, and this context is different somehow, and we tend to sort of come up with big rules like we don't trust anything that a punishment trainer says, like actually there's little bits in there that are quite useful, that are, you know, that you know, they're looking at enrichment and other ways that we might not have even noticed, and embracing the complexity of I'm sad and my life is okay, for example, is part of our the embracing of the and.
I love that. I love that. The embracing of the and. I think that's really important because that allows us to navigate through different things when we are able to recognize multiple states. I think that's really important, because when we focus in on one, we'll get sucked down that rabbit hole more freely, I think, if that's the case. And what you said there
Yeah.
is really important as well. I think you know, a lot of the discussions that I've been involved with, especially the kind of beyond the operant stuff and some of the things I talk about myself, there's been some kind of criticism that it's somehow anti-training, and I know I keep saying this, I have to declare myself, but it's not. I've never said don't train. I've never said don't enjoy what you do. I just want us to have a bit more emotional truth in what we do.
Mhm.
And, you know, if we
Absolutely.
say, oh, my dog loves that, we just have to put a question mark sometimes. If we say it's because, oh, I love it and it's my needs, and that's absolutely great and it's truthful. And also
Right.
just thinking more about that, the why, rather, because we've got so good at the how. And I talk about the opera merry-go-round, which some people have found that an offensive phrase, but all it means really is that if we keep fighting battles based on methodologies and tools, we will just go round and round and round. When we start talking like we're talking now about stepping back and having a more philosophical look at the emotional experience, some of those kind of debates and arguments become a little bit more mute, because we're thinking about how we connect to another and how we support them. And the big word for me is the word relief. You know, are
Mhm.
we offering relief for all parties, or are we just looking at fixing one narrative?
Mhm. Well, and I love bringing it back to behavior. Like it's all behavior, it's all functional for some reason, right? That's one lens that you could look at things through, and that human behavior, right, is also functional. And so people wouldn't be doing it if it didn't meet some of their needs. And so if we just say no, you can't do that, or here's this thing that meets the needs that I think you have that are not actually what it's meeting at all, you know, then the conversation is going to go sideways. And so until we actually see like this is another being in front of me, they have two legs, they don't have fur, but I can still love them and still recognize that there's their well-being is important, and how can we connect in some way that makes life better. And I'm going to circle it back to our educational system that said like there's only a certain number of A's or B's or whatever, you know, in the American system it goes that way, but and that like it's not a competition, we're all bettering ourselves. So there's not a best human, there's no best human award, there's a bettering, right? And so if you're bettering, then someone else can also be bettering and we could both win. So like there's not like a prize for being the one who's right.
And that's such an important point there, because we feel that we're just turning up to help somebody with their dog, right? That's what it is on paper. But in fact, we're turning up to a lot of the issues and problems with our societal structure, because we're all the product of it. So is that belief system of the carer, and their own expectations and judgments are based on that worldview that has been put in there from early stages. This notion of good and bad behavior, which is very much championed by Victorian educators because we want to avoid bad children and get good children, which, as you said earlier,
Right.
is the children that go on to be most useful to the state. So
Mhm.
all these things, we're turning up to this stuff, and I see us a little bit like kind of doggy social services in a way. We're stepping into a lot of stuff, right? It's not just, and that's why I think it can be quite easy sometimes to just go in purely with a task-oriented view, because you don't have to worry about the other stuff. And say, oh, I can help you to stop that, or we're going to change that. When you
Right.
start
And we
thinking,
certainly need that too, right? If
Yeah.
I go into someone's house and I can't get their dog to, stop jumping on the furniture, and furniture jumping is super important to them, then I'm not, I'm not helping. So, we need to have all of those practical tools, and it's helpful, to be able to use positive reinforcement in whatever way works. And that we're doing it for the system that's right there in front of us, and not because of some bigger rule that we have to do XYZ.
And that's an important point as well, because I think when we start thinking about a care-oriented approach, that doesn't mean that there is no task element to it. We were discussing off air. I've got a gun dog trainer coming in the new year who has really developed a way of putting a care-orientated underpinning to the task orientation of a gun dog, because obviously it is by its very nature a task-oriented approach. So and I think it is about awareness. I think that's the most important word, is being aware. I've got my cake analogy: compassion, awareness, knowledge, empathy. I think if you turn up with those four, you're going to be okay. And finding alignment often, we can't just, that for me, alignment is finding that middle ground, so we can make sure the caregivers needs are met, as well as the dogs. And I think that's important for us to kind of strive to do that. Awesome. Oh my God. So loads of stuff. I've been making some notes here, Grisha, and I've just got loads of stuff. My brain's starting to come back in now. Yeah.
Right. Oh, good.
Yeah.
And while your brain comes back in, I wanted to just mention, so for the polyvagal stuff, that's totally my jam. I love neuroscience, and I love polyvagal theory. And we actually are having a person come into our school and teach about that. There's a webinar in I think January. We're talking about it for humans as well as dogs. So anyway,
Brilliant.
I just wanted to mention Suki Baxter.
Suki Baxter, brilliant. Okay, that's another important one. Let's make sure we share this stuff in the dog center care group a lot as well. I think as these things come up.
And you're coming in to teach for us also.
Yeah. So that's, I think, next May. I think I start, which is amazing. I'm really excited about that. And I'm really honored. But it's exciting, and I think what you're doing with the school is amazing, because I think what can happen sometimes is that you get a kind of a school get built around an individual, which is fine. But what you're doing with your school is you're really creating all these different connections and networks all around the same kind of theme, really, so people can pull the strands that they need as part of their own truth. And I think that's what's really important for me. All the stuff that I write, I try and write it in a way that is just, obviously it's my opinion, I know, but not in a this is what you must do. It's a case of, look, listen to things. We're not going to agree on everything that everybody says. We're going to feel challenged by some stuff, and I really hope people feel challenged rather than threatened. But then we just take the strands we need for our truth and how we do stuff, and we find our own way through. And that's why some of the absolutist side of things that we were discussing off air isn't always helpful for some people, because they feel, I can't be that, so therefore I won't try and go down that route. We've all got to find our own way of working that's kind of authentic for us. But Deborah Dana just came to me, is the person who did the templates for triggers and glimmers. And it comes.
Claire, if you're watching, can you take notes for me on that?
Yeah, Deborah Dana. So you can it's a free little ebook, I think, about these things for humans, but it's really important to kind of identify what those glimmers are for you, and how you incorporate them then into things like saying breathing exercises, even holding things tangible. I don't even know where it is now. She's not no help to me if I was triggered now. I've got a little heart-shaped stone that my husband gave me that he found on the beach when we went on our honeymoon. And I've just packed a lot of goodness into that stone, so I can just hold that, and it's just there, and I'm back on that beach, and I'm honeymoon, everything else, and it's powerful stuff, right? It's powerful stuff for us. And
it really is. Yeah.
I have to hold that.
Deliberate intention to put an emotion into yeah, a stone or a heart space or whatever. Yeah, it works.
Right, so we're coming to the end of the hour, which is it's been a bit crazy, really. So I've got a few other things I was going to ask, but I think I'll hand it over to you. Where do you see? So we've got BAT 2.0. So obviously, because of the very nature of what you're doing, which is about an evolving awareness of the support needs of another, if you like, and how they interact and what they need to do to be able to better self-regulate through co-regulation with that connection. I'm guessing that BAT will continue to develop, and where do you see it then? What do you have vibes now of thinking, yeah, I can see it going this way or that way? What do you think the future is for BAT?
So I can't not develop it. So definitely developing is part of it. And what I love about the school is that I have sort of the core piece of the philosophy of empowerment of the animals and need-based, basically cake related. And then inviting people with all kinds of different information, right? Coming with their lenses are very different and their approaches are different, but they're all compatible with what I do. And so I'd say the future of BAT is wide open. The new technique I just developed with the leash belay of how to be able to sort of hold on if you have a much larger dog, for scenarios where you can't just give space or whatever. That came to me when I was just shopping in a store and I found this huge collar for a dog, and I was like, well, that's basically like a belt. And then I put it on and then I was like, oh, that's kind of like a belay device. And so then rock climbing came in, and anyway, and now I get to use it with this dog Joey, and who knows where else that will go. What I love most about my work right now is that I find that I'm actually, so I started out teaching dogs, and so dogs were my learners, and then the caregivers, right, were the learners. So the teaching people to teach dogs, and then I taught people to teach dogs. And now I find that one of my biggest joys comes from having other people come and teach at my school, and through the way that we interact and the questions that my students then bring to them or that I bring to them, that influences how they are. And so eventually it's in some way BAT will sort of be obsolete because everyone will be doing it. Like that's my future goal, is that everyone has this sort of like way of being in the world that gives the freedom and space that animals need, that also meets our needs, and that then that technique will sort of be filtered into all the other techniques. So that's what I see as the future of BAT. So it infiltrates how we are with ourselves and how we are with dogs.
And I think that's been the
small views.
Yeah, of course. And I hope we have that world, because it sounds amazing, right? And I think
if you can't picture the best case scenario, it will never happen. So might as well.
That's right, absolutely. I think this is the magic of BAT, even from the kind of its humble beginnings, really, is the notion of collaboration and inclusivity. And when I say about collaboration, not just from other professionals, but between the handler and the dog, and the environment, and just recognizing all the players, actually, rather than just having that very set approach of going to get the dog to do this instead or stop them from doing that. It just creates a more of a dynamic. And BAT is, there is a structure to it, I know, but all around the world, everybody who uses BAT, and I do, the beautiful thing, every session will be unique. And it will be beautiful, and there will be things learned in that moment that are only shared with those people that were there, and the dog, if that makes sense, and that dog's individual journey. And that's so lovely, because it's not as strict and rigid as some of the other protocols that are out there. I'm just a big fan, as you know, and I think it's great, and I think it's been a real joy today. We talked about a lot of stuff, Grisha.
We did. I realize, I'm sorry, can I add one more thing? I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we, in the future of BAT, is we are also working on sort of getting certification in a different way. So this late fall, early next year, more certification things will be coming on the website. So that's also part of the future of BAT.
That's exciting. Yeah. So more work for Claire then. coming up.
That's right. Yeah. And in an interesting new role for the folks, we've got about, I think, 150 CBATs, certified BAT instructors around the world. And so creating new opportunities for them, as well as more ways for new people to become CBATs. So, but yeah, more work for Claire,
Do
basically.
you feel there's, do you feel it's quite an exciting time at the moment, that there's things are shifting, that there's more than just a moment, that there is a movement to explore different disciplines and find how these things interconnect and really broadening those horizons? Do you feel that?
I do. And yeah, it felt like, if I were to compare this to 10 years ago, or even just pre-pandemic, that it just feels like there's this huge interdisciplinary approach that's sort of happening with folks, and more mindfulness just as humans, as we deal with this sort of group trauma. Lots of people then are dealing with it in ways that approach their own self-care, that then influences how we deal with dogs and their trauma. And so I think it's really an exciting time for dogs and the humans in this world.
Well, I really appreciate your time tonight, and we're going to make sure that I think Claire's been putting some links into the group as well, but we'll make sure we'll always keep sharing stuff that you do, Grisha, and I'm really excited about coming in and joining the school in next year.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for your time tonight, and thanks everybody for listening in. Just a couple of things. We've got Katrin Yarn coming on the 21st, 3 p.m. Katrin is a veterinary behaviourist based over in Abu Dhabi. She's got some really interesting views on how she sees the veterinary behaviourist community going, and the frictions and tensions there within veterinary behaviourists, and the connections with trainers, and also there's a lot going on in the vet world, especially over here in the UK. Sunday 28th, we've got Sindor Pangal. Sorry, Dave?
Is there a lot of reactivity in the world as well?
Yeah, and
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially I don't know, it's like in the States there, but the veterinary community over here in the UK, there's a lot going on. I think it's a industry in flux at the moment, but there's a lot of changes going on, and I think there's a lot of things, even for us, in our community, there's a lot of things that have been kind of perceived wisdoms or practices that are kind of not up to purpose anymore. I think we're all reevaluating a lot of stuff at the moment. A lot of us.
Right. That's a great way to phrase it.
Yeah, and especially in our community, because we did kind of get stuck in doing the same thing for about 20 years. Really, we kind of got stuck in a bit of an area with the kind of mainstream, and now we're thinking, we're kind of almost coming out blinking, thinking, oh my God, there's other stuff we can think about and do and connect, and maybe we shouldn't be so scared of difference, and maybe we should embrace it.
Right, inclusivity in all kinds of ways, right? So culturally, as well as training philosophy and all those things.
And that's a big thing, actually, and something that it's about time, I think. Both
yes, right. It's about time.
Yeah, Sunday the 28th, we've got amazing Sindor Pangal coming in and sharing her amazing work with street dogs in India, and looking at Sindor's amazing perspective. And then I'm really chuffed about this because she's a very dear friend. 11th of December, big Christmas treat. Sarah Fisher's coming in. And we're going to have a good old chat about all sorts of stuff, I think. So that's a nice little pre-Christmas treat. So there you go. A few more coming up before Christmas, guys. Thank you again, Grisha.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
I'll speak to you soon. Bye, everybody. Take care.